My name is Sofia, I'm 32 years old, and what I'm about to tell you happened 3 years ago. Even today, when I think about what I experienced, my heart races. Some people call me crazy, others fall silent when I finish speaking. But I need to share this, because maybe someone watching has been through something similar, or can help me understand what really happened on that street. It all started when I moved to a new neighborhood. It was a developing area, you know? Beautiful houses, wide streets, everything very organized. I had just gotten divorced and needed a fresh start. I found a house to rent at an incredibly low price. When I asked the realtor why it was so cheap, he just said the owner wanted to rent it quickly. I didn't question much at the time, I was desperate for a new place. The house was on Palm Tree Street, number 247. It was a small street, with only 8 houses on each side. 16 houses total. On the first day I moved in, I noticed something strange. All the other houses were inhabited, but I hardly ever saw anyone on the street. It was as if people were hiding or avoiding going out. In the first few days, I tried to be a good neighbor. I brought cookies to the lady next door, Mrs. Clara, a woman of about 60 with graying hair always tied in a bun. She received me politely, but I noticed her hands trembled when she held the plate. Her eyes had an expression of fear that bothered me. "Thank you, dear," she said, quickly looking around. "But you shouldn't walk on the street after 6 in the evening." I thought it was strange, but I assumed it was just a typical concern of an older person. How wrong I was. In the following weeks, I began to notice bizarre patterns. Every morning, exactly at 7:30 a.m., I would hear footsteps on the street. Always the same footsteps, at the same rhythm, passing in front of my house. Curious, I went to the window several times, but I could never see who it was. It was as if the person disappeared the moment I looked. The first truly disturbing event happened 3 weeks after my move. It was a Tuesday, I remember perfectly. I was washing dishes when I heard screams coming from the house across from mine. They were screams of desperation, as if someone was being attacked. I dropped everything and ran to the window. The house belonged to the Martinez family, a young couple with a small daughter. I had seen them a few times, always in a hurry, always looking worried. The screams were coming from there, but all the windows were closed. I grabbed my phone and was about to call the police when the screams stopped abruptly. A deafening silence took over the street. I waited a few minutes and then went out to see if everything was okay. I knocked on the Martinez family's door, but no one answered. The house was completely silent. Even the lights were off, although it was only 2 in the afternoon. I returned home confused and disturbed. That night, I couldn't sleep properly. I kept hearing strange noises, as if someone was dragging something heavy down the street, very slowly. They were noises that seemed to last for hours. The next day, the Martinez house was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, nothing. It was as if they had never lived there. When I asked Mrs. Clara what had happened, she turned pale. They left during the night," she whispered. "Like all the others." "Others? What others?" I asked. She shook her head and closed the door in my face. That's when I started paying more attention to the street. In the next few days, I realized there were many more empty houses than I had imagined. Of the 16 houses on the street, only 6 still had residents. And all of them had the same expression of fear that I had seen on Mrs. Clara's face. I decided to investigate on my own. I started writing everything down, times of strange noises, which houses were still inhabited, suspicious movements. That's when I discovered a terrible pattern. Every 2 weeks, exactly, a family would disappear. They wouldn't move, wouldn't leave traces, they would simply disappear. And always in the same way, screams during the day, total silence at night, and empty house the next morning. The most frightening thing is that no one seemed to care. The remaining neighbors never commented on the disappearances. It was as if they simply accepted that this was going to happen. and I began to understand why. One night, 2 weeks after the Martinez family's disappearance, I was in the kitchen drinking tea when I heard the footsteps again. But this time they were different, slower, heavier. And there were many footsteps, as if it were a group of people walking in perfect synchronization. I turned off the lights in the house and hid behind the curtain. What I saw made me question my own sanity. They were people, yes, but there was something fundamentally wrong with them. They walked in single file, all wearing identical dark clothes. Their movements were mechanical, robotic. And their faces, my God, their faces were completely expressionless. Like wax masks. They stopped in front of the Johnson family's house, an elderly couple who lived 3 houses down. They stood there for a few minutes, completely motionless. Then, one of them stepped out from the group and knocked on the door. Mr. Johnson opened the door immediately, as if he were waiting. He didn't seem surprised or scared. He just nodded and went back inside. Within a few minutes, he and his wife came out carrying 2 small suitcases. They joined the group without saying a word. And then they all left together, with the same mechanical and synchronized steps. They disappeared into the darkness of the street. The next morning, the Johnson house was empty. It was at that moment that I understood I was in real danger. Whatever force was making people disappear from that street was following a pattern. And I could be next. I started planning my escape, but I was afraid to leave the house during the night. During the day, the street seemed normal, but I knew there was something sinister waiting in the shadows. I decided I would leave on the weekend, during the day, when I thought it would be safer. But they didn't give me that chance. On Thursday night, exactly 2 weeks after the Johnsons' disappearance, I was packing when I heard the familiar footsteps. My blood froze. I turned off all the lights and hid in the bedroom, trembling. The footsteps stopped in front of my house. I heard a knock on the door, 3 slow and deliberate knocks. My heart was beating so hard I thought it was going to explode. I didn't answer, of course. I stayed completely motionless in the dark. The knocks repeated. 3 times. Then, silence. I thought they had gone away, but then I heard something that made me lose control, the front door opening. I was absolutely certain it was locked. I had checked several times. Footsteps echoed through the hallway of the house. Slow and heavy footsteps, like those I heard on the street every night. They were inside my house. I hid under the bed, covering my mouth with my hands so as not to make noise. The footsteps approached my room. The door opened with a creak. Through the gap under the bed, I saw feet. Many feet. All wearing identical black shoes. They stood there for several minutes. I could barely breathe. Then, a voice spoke. But it wasn't a normal human voice. It was as if several people were speaking at the same time, in perfect synchronization. Sofia. It's time. How did they know my name? I had never introduced myself to anyone except Mrs. Clara. The feet moved around the room. I heard drawers being opened, things being moved. They were looking for me, but in a strangely casual way, as if they knew they would find me eventually. Sofia. You can't hide forever. Everyone comes with us in the end. The multiple voice spoke again. There was something hypnotic about it, something that made part of me want to come out of hiding and go with them. But the rational part of my mind screamed for me to stay where I was. They searched for a few more minutes before leaving the room. I heard the footsteps moving away, then the front door closing. But I didn't move. I stayed under the bed until the sun rose, trembling with fear and cold. When I finally came out of hiding, I realized my house had been subtly altered. Nothing obvious, just small things out of place. A photo turned to the side, books reorganized on the shelf, a mug in the wrong position in the kitchen. It was as if they had left clues that they had been there. That same day, I packed and left the house forever. I didn't care about the rental contract, about the furniture I left behind, about anything. I just wanted to get out of that place. But the story doesn't end there. A few months later, when I had already settled in another neighborhood, I decided to research Palm Tree Street on the internet. I wanted to understand what had happened, if other people had gone through the same experience. What I discovered disturbed me even more. Palm Tree Street didn't exist in the city's official records. It didn't appear on any map, there was no official address with that name. It was as if it simply didn't exist in the real world. But there was something even stranger. I found online forums where other people reported similar experiences. Not on the same street, but in different locations with the same pattern. Streets that don't appear on maps, residents who disappear mysteriously, hooded figures who collect people during the night. One of the posts caught my special attention. It was from a woman who said she had lived on such a street for 6 months before managing to escape. She wrote something that gave me chills. They're not human. They're collectors. And the streets where they operate are like farms. They cultivate people there until they reach the right number, then harvest everyone and move to the next location. According to her, the people who are collected don't die. They're taken somewhere to serve some specific purpose. But what purpose that would be, no one knows. I tried to contact her through the forum, but her account had been deleted. Actually, the entire post had disappeared a few days later. For months, this experience haunted me. I had constant nightmares, woke up in the middle of the night thinking I heard synchronized footsteps. I had to go to therapy to be able to move on with my life. But a few weeks ago, something happened that made me decide to tell this story publicly. I was at the supermarket shopping when I saw a person who seemed familiar to me. It was Mrs. Clara, the lady who lived next to my old house. She was in the checkout line, buying only basic items. I approached her carefully. When she saw me, she turned pale as paper. "Sofia," she whispered. You managed to get out?" "I did," I replied. "And you? How are you here?" She looked around nervously, as if she were being watched. "I also left," she said. 3 days after you. They came to get the last family, and I knew I would be next in line. I got in my car and drove until I couldn't anymore." "And the other people? What happened to them?" Mrs. Clara shook her head sadly. "They were all taken. I was the last original resident of the street. After I left, I'm sure they brought new families to restart the process." She gave me a piece of paper with a phone number. "If you ever want to know more about this, call this number. There's a group of people who investigate these cases. People who went through the same thing we did." Before I could ask more questions, she hurried out of the supermarket. I kept that paper in my hand for weeks, without the courage to call. But last night, I decided it was time to seek answers. I called the number. A female voice answered. "Anonymous survivors, this is Maria." I quickly explained my experience. There was a long silence on the other side of the line. "Palm Tree Street," she finally asked. "You lived at number 247? "Yes," I replied, surprised. "How do you know?" "Because that was the 12th operation of theirs that we managed to track. And you're the 3rd person who managed to escape from that specific street." She explained that the group had identified a pattern in several cities. Always small streets, always with 16 houses, always with the same collection process of residents. "They're very organized," she said. "And they're spreading. They appear in more places each time." "But who are they?" I asked. "What do they want with people?" "We still don't know for sure," she replied. "But we have some theories. And if you want to help investigate, we have a meeting next week." I'm still deciding whether to go or not. Part of me wants to move on and forget all this. But another part knows this won't stop. That other people will go through the same terror I went through. That's why I decided to tell my story here. If you're watching and have lived through something similar, know that you're not alone. There are more people like us, People who managed to escape and who are trying to understand what really happened. And if you're considering moving to a house with very cheap rent on a small and isolated street, think twice. Observe the neighbors. Pay attention to nighttime noises. And if something seems wrong, trust your instinct and get out of there as soon as possible. Because I was lucky. I managed to escape before it was my turn. But many other people weren't so lucky. And they're still out there, somewhere, serving some purpose that only these collectors know. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I still hear the synchronized footsteps echoing in my memory. And I wonder, are they still looking for me? Will they someday find where I'm living now? I hope I never find out the answers to those questions. But if you ever hear that I mysteriously disappeared, you'll know what really happened. And maybe, just maybe, someone who watched this video will remember my story and continue investigating. Because the truth needs to be discovered. And these people, whoever they are, need to be stopped. Thank you for listening to me. And be careful out there.